Oh, good. Kind of.
Is it stream? Oh, it's streaming.
So it's streaming.
Okay.
We're streaming now. I'm just making sure everyone is in the shot.
Yeah.
The main thing I'm concerned about is just the microphone. No, the microphone. Well, the lighting's not great. It's not. It's not. Hopefully it's not.
Yeah.
But the microphone is where the video content is coming through. And it's not really long enough to set it up. Yeah. For the microphone.
Women underscore
Erica, the other thing would be if you I can get the microphone to be passed round, if everyone is willing to move over, but if you want to keep everyone there, that's fine.
I think would that be all? Do you think it could be alright with voices?
Yeah, I think if they speak loud enough, then it should be picked up by the microphone.
And just to check, everyone's entered the back of the Queensland draw to go to get a prize for Hate's chocolate. So there's a couple of minutes if you quickly want to run out and put your name in the draw. I was the first entry.
I'm vice president. Normally Lisa's illegal, but she's fine. has the International Federation of Medical Schools. I love the map to see you got medal. Oh, I think
Yeah, so remember where I am?
My name's David. I'm responsible for setting up video. Can I just ask you to wait during the event? This is speaking advice just so you really picked up both the microphone and the computer. Thanks, Patrick.
Hi everyone. I think we'll get started now. My name's Ashra. I'm in my 4th year and I'm the Media Officer for Women in Medicine UNSW. I'll be moderating the Q&A today. Thank you so much for coming. Obviously, one of the major parts of tackling all of these issues is having discussions about it, asking questions and seeing what we can do to make a difference. And you've made an important step in doing that. So thank you for coming. Before we introduce our fabulous speakers, we'll have a presentation from BOQ.
Hey everyone, thanks for the opportunity to come down and sponsor this event. I'm Troy and this is Chris. We both work for BOQ Specialists. For those that haven't heard of us, we're a finance company that deals specifically with medical professionals. So we're starting from students. We have sort of credit managers that understand the life cycle of a doctor, a dentist, or a vet. We look after residential stuff, commercial stuff, asset finance, pretty much a one-stop shop. We did have a wonderful video to talk about some sort of real life situations that we've been a part of. Unfortunately, the sound isn't working, and I don't think me doing a voiceover would do it justice. But yeah, just really appreciate the opportunity to come down. Without further ado, we're going to draw the Hague's chocolate pack, which we also may have forgotten, but we'll give it to you without.
We have Angus Toller. Angus, I actually forgot to take it out. It's my fault. What I'll do is I'll email you tomorrow just to get the best address and we'll shoot it over to you for you. My fault.
If you send us the video link, then we can put it on the event page so everyone can see it. And just in question. So like at what point would we get involved with BOQ? Like, would it be while we're still students or once we start working?
So we have a student product offering that's actually about to be launched tomorrow. So it's just coincidental timing. But
This
yeah,
is the
so
launch of it.
welcome. But yeah, so pretty much now it's from student through to grads, you know, registrars. We've also got a fellowship product offering as well. So we're pretty much there right from the start of your career progression and there to help you work through it. With whatever needed.
Awesome. Thank you so much for coming.
Cheers, guys.
So we'll get started with a address from Chloe. If you also wanted to start by introducing yourself.
Okay, sure. I might do that in the mic so everyone can hear me. I'm not afraid of speaking super loud. So, hi guys, I'm Chloe. I'm a medical student from Campbelltown and I attend Western Sydney University. And I'm also the Vice President and Colonel of AMSA. I grew up in Western Sydney and I've been lucky enough to undertake most of my training. I'm in final year, so medical school is coming to an end for me soon, and the real world of actual adult responsibility. I think my journey through medical school has been pretty similar to most of you in this room. Because we all have some common landmarks that run through medical school. There are good ones. There's the first time you talk to a patient. There's the first time you get that really tricky cannula, and there's the first time you start surgery. And then there are the bad ones. There's the first time as a female you're walking through a ward and someone calls out nurse to get your attention. There's the first time you get a dressing down for not knowing the answer to a question. The first time someone makes an inappropriate comment at your expense. And there's the first time one of your patients passes away. And these aren't things you forget. It's really easy to look at that list and accept it as the norm to say, that's just medical school. Because the fact is, these are really common experiences. A lot of my close friends are medical students and junior doctors, and whenever we catch up as a group, it's really inevitable that we touch on something in this spectrum. And in just the past fortnight, we've spoken about how as females, we often hear that maybe surgery just isn't the right choice for you if you want a family. And I've heard stories of my friends seeing their peers bullied in the workplace. Of my friends being bullied. I too have my own experiences with sexual harassment and bullying. Some of them fall under the umbrella of what people like to call tough love. I've been kicked out of theatre for failing to answer questions correctly. I've had doctors raise their voices at me, and more than once, as a result of something that's being said to me, I've gone home and wondered to myself why I ever picked this path. The thing is, I'm lucky. I've had really good support networks. I've had great mentors. And when I have had to escalate issues, they've been really well received. My doubt over this path has never been anything more than momentary, and while these issues have been hurtful, for me they're just picking up to my journey. What I wonder is what happens to people who don't have those good support networks, people who aren't aware of escalation processes, or who are all too aware of how those processes make them. I worry we'll lose those people from the profession. So very often my friends and I talk about other pathways, what we do outside of medicine, and the way in which the culture of our hospital systems and our profession means that maybe this isn't the best career for us. We talk about working for NGOs and working in health consulting and 1,001 other things. And at first these conversations seemed akin to verbal daydreaming. But as we've got older, I've noticed the tone of these conversations change. I don't think we're daydreaming anymore. I've seen my friends leave to pursue other avenues, and I've seen others compromise on their career choices to go into areas of medicine that perhaps we see as less toxic. And I think that I'll only be seeing more of that as time progresses. The fact is, as a profession, we have a lot of work to do. Our culture needs to change because as it stands, it isn't healthy. Beyond my own anecdotes and those of how big a problem bullying and harassment is. A survey from the Australian Medical Students Association in 2015 of 519 students revealed that over 60% reported being victimised or witnessing bullying in both hospital and community. The problem doesn't stop there. It's not just an issue for students, it's an issue for the wider profession. The Royal Australasian College of Surgeons, or RACS, Expert Advisory Group report in 2015 reported that nearly 50% of college fellows, trainees, and international medical graduates report being subjected to discrimination, bullying, or sexual harassment. Those statistics are shocking, and it's time to do something about them. It's been great to watch the progress in this field over the past few years, to see events like this conference, to go to the AMA National Conference, and see and be inspired by their panel on sexual harassment and bullying, and to hear about the great work that RACS is doing. It's also promising to see a shift towards defining acts of bullying and sexual harassment in the healthcare system as legislated illegal actions in the workplace that are punishable, rather than actions that are described and then ignored as unacceptable or have perpetrators being excused lightly for their behavior. It's also been great to see a cultural change to support victims who are mostly women, mostly junior doctors, and young medical students in important and fledgling steps of their training. As a student, medical indemnities have also started providing whistleblower protection in covering legal fees and complaints involving reporting other healthcare professionals or incidents of hospitals where you're acting in good faith or in the public interest and required to do so by law. And I'll be honest, when I was required to give this speech, put bluntly, there was a legal level panic. I didn't at all feel qualified and I felt a bit anxious. My friends laughed at me and some pep talks ensued, and I left feeling equipped. I have years of student leadership under my belt. I have my own experiences and I'm here to talk as a peer and I'm qualified to do that. And I think that my own feelings of inadequacy are sometimes paralleled by women who are in leadership positions. I think recently we've all heard that stat of men will apply for a job if they meet only 60% of the requirements, that women will apply only if they meet 100%. Obviously, there are numerous hurdles to female leadership that I think this is one, and I feel like as individuals we can all work on. I know a lot of talented females who inspire me and who yet who fail to see themselves and their achievements with any degree of opportunity. More than half of medical students are female. In 2011, 43% of GPs and 34% of specialists were women. Yet when you look at higher leadership, less than 20% of medical school deans, department chairs, and hospital CEOs are female. And the parallel can be seen in AMSA, where in our 67-year history, we've only had 11 female presidents. These stats are pretty sad, and I'm not sure what all the barriers are, but I look forward to talking through something smart about them. I also think that sometimes as students, we think we can just sit idly by under the refrain, change comes from above. But we all have a responsibility to change culture surrounding issues of bullying, sexual harassment, and gender equity. To an extent, that does mean that one day when we're senior, we look back on these experiences and we ensure that the next generation has more positive ones. But I also think we have a responsibility. Our responsibility to mentor and back each other, and sometimes to back ourselves, and to speak up when things aren't right and support others when we see them struggle. Dr. Ruth Mitchell, the chair of the RACS Trainees Association, gave a speech at the AMA National Conference this year, and she closed with some words from Dr. Zeus. I'll leave you with them too. Unless someone like you cares a whole awful lot, nothing is going to get better. It's not. Thank you.
Thank you, Chloe, for that great speech. And now if I could get all of the speakers to go through and introduce yourselves to our audience. Say a little bit about yourself.
Sure. I'm Tessa. I'm a paediatric advanced trainee at Sydney Children's Hospital. And I'm here with my AMA/ASMOL hat on as a member of the Council of Doctors in Training federally and our local New South Wales Doctors in Training.
I'm Peggy De Silva. I'm a vascular surgeon. I'm a graduate of New South Wales University, and it's quite nice to be back. I have been in private practice for the last few years, and I work part-time. I have a daughter, and I love being a surgeon, and I hope that I will be able to make you all feel that RACS has changed or is changing, and we certainly have a way to go, but I would hope that the experiences that have come out and been spoken about are things means that RACs are really looking forward to changing and making sure that everyone that goes through training gets training that you all deserve to have.
I'm Rafi Kasabi. I'm a vascular surgeon as well. I think it's just a coincidence.
The nicest specialty.
I'm a vascular surgeon at Royal Prince Alfred Hospital and a few other hospitals around. And I'm also the chairman currently of the New South Wales State Committee of the Australian College of Surgeons. I want to thank New South Wales Student Committee for inviting me and us to this event, which I think is an amazing thing to be happening. It certainly never happened while I was a medical student and here in these very corridors. I think that I'm very glad to just looking around that there are some men around. I thought I was going to be the token man, but actually there are other men around, and it's good to know because harassment and bullying is not just limited to women, and in fact I have been a victim of it as well during my training. So anyway, I'll be very happy to answer questions if Mrs.
So we've had some questions submitted prior to the event. The floor is completely open to questions at any time, so if at any point you think of a question, just put your hand up and I'll stop asking mine and give you a chance as well. But to start off, I was just thinking maybe we could talk about what you guys think the major issues are when it comes to gender equity in medicine and bullying and harassment. Like if you had to sort of come up with the top 5 that need to be addressed, what would you?
So I guess I'd tackle that in a couple of ways. The first thing is to give a bit of background as to why we've ended up here today and why this event is happening this year and probably wouldn't have happened even 2 or 3 years ago in the same way, and certainly not much before that. Now, in I think it was March or April last year, in 2015, Gabbo McMullen, who's also a vascular surgeon, very progressive group made some comments in the context of a book launch that she didn't anticipate being picked up by the media, which you probably all have come across, and stimulated a huge kind of surge of discussion when she basically said quite explicitly that a young trainee would have been better off in a compromising situation, having obliged and quote unquote given him the blowjob because her career would have been safer if she had done that. So she said she would have been better off doing that. Now the context of that is that that would have been a less rocky road to run. And she stood by that comment and continues to do so to my understanding, in the sense that she believes that yes, that would have been the easier way to go, not that it's the right way to go. So that's a very distinct point. I'm sure she will talk more about all of that later. But that, I think, from an AMA asthma point of view, as well as anybody who was on the wards, and certainly I believe among medical students as well, anybody who was connected to medicine was suddenly flooded with questions about, oh my goodness, is this happening? Is everybody being harassed? Are all these, doctors perverts? What's going on? Like it was shocking to have that kind of revelation made in national press about a group who arguably are held to be the most to higher perhaps ethical standards than many other professions, and for plenty of good reasons. So from there was a big movement towards going, okay, well, this is a problem. And the first few responses from the College of Surgeons, from the AMA and various other people who were asked to comment was, oh, yeah, well, this is obviously terrible. And a few people said, oh, well, it can't be that big of a problem. And I think the initial response was one of throw sand on the fire. And I think that's fair in some ways. But then it escalated, and essentially the result of that, in large part from a RAC's point of view, I believe, is the expert advisory group, which I'm sure my surgical colleagues will talk more about. But certainly that was the result of intense media pressure to actually figure out what the problem was. Various state AMAs also did surveys of their members, and the rough response rates of doctors in training in New South Wales was similar to that in Victoria, where about 10% of all members had experienced sexual harassment, slightly more bullying, and the at-risk groups were primarily women, international medical graduates, anyone who had anything that would, on any concept of diversity, make them tick a diversity box. So particularly LGBTIQ, identifying doctors in training, medical students, and certainly being junior is a big risk factor as well. So that's kind of the context, I think, and from there you start to understand what some of the main issues are. I would like to conceptualise what we have to do and when we break down the problem into three things, which were identified by Brian Aller at the Sexual Harassment Roundtable that he convened in April of last year, which is process, access, and culture. And those are the three domains in which really we have fallen down as a profession and allowed what is essentially archaic behaviour that should have been tossed out a long time ago to continue into 2015. Okay? And not 2016. But we are turning around, and I think lots of impressive gains have been made. So I'll be quiet and let somebody else talk.
So I was just hoping you could elaborate on those three different points: process, access, and culture. What are the sort of things that you're referring to?
Yeah, sure. So as was discussed at that roundtable, process, so what we were looking at is why bullying, harassment, discrimination has been allowed to continue in the medical profession, why it's a problem and why we haven't gone, this is really bad, why haven't we stopped this, why have we not been successful in ditching it. So from a process point of view, it's about complaints processes. So when bad behaviours do occur in the workplace, the way that like when a toddler behaves badly, you say, that's not the right thing to do, don't do that again, here's the reasons, here's a better way to do it. And everybody learns. The problem in the workplace is that we don't often have safe complaints processes. So from a trainee's point of view, and this is what Gabrielle McMullen was getting at, it is not safe to report, in many circumstances, experiences of discrimination, bullying or sexual harassment, okay? And there's many reasons for that. Drawn out processes that trainees don't feel are going to result in any action or any consequence or any change. So there's a lot of things to unpack in that. Access is about the way that trainees can access those processes, and that's more about knowing who to turn to, and in particular, the divide or the perceived divide and actual circumstances between, say, college processes, so education and training processes and grievances around that, versus employee processes. And so if say a boss did something awful to me at work, which has happened in a minor circumstance many times, who do I complain to if I say that's not right? Do I complain to my college because he's my supervisor? Do I complain to my employer because she is the head of the department? Who's responsible for that person and responsible for action to change their behaviour? So that was a concern. Universities also come into that as well when we're talking about medical students. And culture is essentially around what has allowed these behaviours to continue to exist and not be called out by peers, so the bystander issue, as well as what makes people think that this is okay, that these behaviours are acceptable and continue to be perpetrated. Clarifies?
So I guess from our point of view, from the College of Surgeons, so when that initial sort of front page headline thing came out, there had been work previously that had been done, raster surveys that had shown very high rates of bullying and high rates of harassment. And I suppose the college, I think it would be fair to say the college did know about it. It wasn't as though this was suddenly brought to everyone's attention.
Can I just say the college was actually actively working on a building respect program, which has subsequently been launched. But they had started on that program a long time before anything hit the headlines. So it certainly is something that was known.
But it was known, and like you said, people were working towards things. But in all things in college, things do work very slowly, and this certainly galvanised people. And Michael Griggs, who again is a vascular surgeon, who was was a theme, who was the president of the college at the time, immediately sort of took big steps and started the expert advisory committee, which was a totally separate group of very well-known people to say, we're going to do a survey and we're going to ask everyone in the College of Surgeons to fill out this anonymous survey, and we're going to actually look at how prevalent is this issue. And it got sent out to everybody. There was a huge emails, and within the college, everyone was notified about it. It wasn't just a sort of tick box. There was actually areas to actually write your own experiences, and some of the things that came out of that were shocking. Like, when I was a trainee, I've had bullying, I've been sexually harassed. But one of the things that happens, and this will happen to all of you, is you will think that you're the only person this happens to. Something will happen to you and you will think either, I misunderstood the person, I deserve to be treated like this, no one's going to believe me because this is, it's only going to happen to me, it hasn't happened to everybody else, because when you're feeling miserable, everyone else will look happy to you. And you won't ever realise that everyone else might be having their own problems, because you'll be internalising it. And you'll be thinking, I'm not worthy, I'm not good enough. They're just telling me what I already knew about myself. And I think that's one of the reasons why people, and especially when you're being bullied, and I think we talk about the spiral, where you lose that self-worth that you have, or that self-esteem. And the more you get bullied, the worse you become, and sometimes the worse that you are as a trainee. And all of a sudden other people start to go, oh, you're right, they are bad. And it's a self-fulfilling prophecy. And so, there were some really horrific things that came out of that. And I'm the Young Fellows representative, which is the Young Fellows are anyone that's graduated within the last 10 years. And we had a forum, and Michael Griggs actually came to the forum, and this was big news. And he sat around and he said, right, can everyone in this, anyone in this room being bullied, can you put your hand up? And everyone, there were 20 of us, and everyone put their hand up. And he was actually really taken aback by that. And, he was quite shocked, and his wife is actually a surgeon as well. And we heard him speaking to her later saying, I couldn't believe it. Everyone said they've been bullied. And, perhaps, and there are people that go through with never having had anything bad happen to them. And, Michael being white, Anglo, tall, probably played rugby, he was probably the type of person that you'd expect to be a surgeon. But I think for everyone in that room, there were lots of women in that room, there were lots of people from diverse backgrounds, there were lots of IMGs in that room, everyone had their own experience. And I think for him, that was a really shocking thing. And I think one of the things about this coming out is that bullying and harassment, not everyone does it. There's a few bad eggs that do it. And the problem is that the bystander issue is a really big thing. And, there have been people that have been complained about. And I know when I've complained about somebody and people go, yeah, look, we know he's like that. Just ignore it. Just ignore it. We know that you're not like that. Just ignore it. And that's the problem that's happened, is that people have said that they let people, department heads get away with something, or someone in the department because he's a good, good surgeon or a great physician, or he's a great academic, he brings in lots of research grants, whatever reason, that person's allowed to get away with that. And so I think one of the things about the EAG bringing all of this out is that all of a sudden people have suddenly gone, oh, we can't actually allow this behaviour to continue. And I think that's the change, is that people are actually talking about it, people are recognising it, and this is the whole culture change. This year at the College of Surgeons, General Morrison gave the keynote speech. So for those of you who don't know, he was the general in the army when that whole big scandal came out in the army about those boys at ADFA that someone had sex with a girl, and they filmed it and they broadcast it to all of his mates. And he gave this talk where he talked about the fact that when he heard about it, he thought, well, it's not the army. These are kids that have just joined the army or joined ADFA. It's obviously their parents, their schools, their upbringing. It has nothing to do with the army. But he said the more he looked into the event, the more he looked at things, the more that he found out about different stories and different things, that he realised that what it was that the army had a culture that attracted these boys. The army had this culture where these guys thought the army will approve of us doing this because that's what the army's about. And he said it's only when he kind of woke up to that and went, I did let this happen because I allowed this culture to continue. And it was a really powerful speech. And I think that was the one thing that he got up and he gave this speech. And I remember the time listening to him thinking, wow, this is the most amazing speech. And when he ended, I have never seen, and it was an entire hall of surgeons got up and gave him a standing ovation. And he really, I think it resonated with a lot of, what we call our traditional surgeons, our typical old white Anglo-Saxon, you know, senior surgeons, and it really resonated with them. And I think, you know, this is one of the really important things that we are now talking about it, and it's now culturally become not okay to bully or harass, and that people are actually genuinely wanting to see a change.
The other thing I might add is that the program that the college has launched, the Royal College of Surgeons, is called RIPS, which is building respect and improving patient safety. And so there is a recognition also that patient safety can be compromised by bullying and harassment. And I think that's also a very important point, which is often missed, because at the end of the day, we are providing a service to the community. And we have to create a safe environment, not only for the employees, but also for the patients.
It sounds a bit like you're talking about sort of General Morrison sort of aha moment, like that moment. I've heard Dr. McMahon speak about it before. The moment where you're finally like, wow, okay, I'm woke. Like I realize that this is an issue. What were your personal aha moments?
I think for me, it was last year when I was working in AMSA, and I wasn't directly involved in the sexual harassment and bullying survey that we did, but I was on the executive that year, and they were telling me the statistics of, you know, over 60% of medical students had experienced bullying and harassment, and we went through quotes of people saying, you know, I thought about ending my own life because of things that happened to me in hospital, or, you know, like I can't see myself working in this sphere because of things that happened, and also that disparity between what we are societally seen as doctors, you know, of, you know, trying to save the world, that whole stereotype, and then the internal culture we have, which is somewhat separate from that, and I think very confusing when you enter medicine. And I think also having a discussion in that room with my team about our own experiences, I had that moment of, oh wow, it wasn't just me.
My aha moment occurred it started when I was a trainee in vascular surgery, and I was being bullied. And it wasn't sort of clear to me at the time. I hadn't ever thought of in terms of being bullied, because I'd really not been bullied before. And I didn't realise what was happening, but I was going down a very rapid downward spiral, where a couple of people in the unit were bullying, and they were picking on me. And coming from a background, so I have a culture of respect, and you don't have rights as far as our culture goes. You know, you're a trainee, you are sort of beholden to these superiors, and you respect them. And so I wouldn't dare say, don't you talk to me like that. Whereas trainees these days will say that. So I found myself in a situation where I couldn't defend myself. And also, there's a huge power differential. So people who are in a position of power, when trainees are really, they feel that the supervisors are in a position of power over them. They're the ones who are going to sign them on later, and they can make them repeat the year, and they can withhold surgery from them. They can withhold cases, and so there's a lot of subtle ways in which a supervisor can really affect the trainee. And so this was all happening to me. And as Becky has said, it becomes this downward spiral where you become so stressed that you no longer function anymore. And so then other people say, what's wrong with you? You know, and then, you know, what they're saying about him must be true. And so it got to a point where the team sat me down and said, we think you have early onset dementia. And sort of the world fell, the wind came out of my sail, you know, that the world fell away from me. I'd already had the fellowship, and I was learning a new piece of piano by Harassment. So it was hard to think that I had dementia. devastated me. And it got to a point where my father had to start coming. I was a grown man, and I was just not dealing with it. And my aha moment through all that was when I got back I changed hospitals at the end of the year and moved on and went to a new hospital. And the new hospital asked me within 3 months to come back and work as a consultant there. And that's the first time I realised that this process that I'd gone through wasn't me. It couldn't have been me because this highly respected unit asked me to come back and work there. Whereas the whole year before, I'd been made to believe that I was useless and worthless. And so I realised then that there was a systematic problem. And that's something that I want to just raise. Does everyone know what the definitions are of bullying and harassment? We bandy these terms around. And I think it's important to have definitions in your head. And I have the expert advisory group report here from College of Surgeons. And bullying is unreasonable behaviour that creates a risk to health and safety. It is a behaviour that is repeated over time or occurs as part of a pattern of behaviour. Unreasonable behaviour is behaviour that is, to a reasonable person, having regard to all the circumstances, would expect that behaviour to victimise, humiliate, undermine, or threaten the person to whom the behaviour is directed. And I think that's a very important point to understand what it is, because bullying can sometimes be used as a weapon by people as well. So not only to make themselves victims, but to say, well, to get out of things, to excuse their own poor behaviour. So, for example, I'm often in a situation where I have to train somebody. I have to tell them that what they did then was not right. And they may turn around if they don't like what I said to them and say, he bullied me. So I think there has to be an understanding that it is a pattern of repetitive behaviour and not just a one-off chastisement or something like that.
I would like to suggest that there are some circumstances where a one-off incident, and I think this has been a point that's been worked on in the new New South Wales Health JMO module on bullying, is that one-off incidents can be considered as bullying. I agree, mostly it's more about that pattern of behaviour, but it's more that there is certainly a distinction between appropriate performance management and therefore to call that bullying is unreasonable because it is an appropriate way to say, you know what, that wasn't the right way to do something. You need to be able to correct and to train.
That's right.
But yeah, the test is more about whether that behaviour would, to a reasonable person, be considered to victimise, threaten, intimidate, that kind of thing. Yeah. So there is. I think this brings up really nicely one of the main issues which I believe the New Acts program seeks to address, and hopefully other colleges will follow with similar programs around educating about what is a good way to teach, what is a good way to train that isn't bullying. Because I think that some of these behaviours come around inadvertently, and many people who are actually the perpetrators of these inappropriate workplace behaviours don't even realise that what they're doing is not what it should be.
Yeah, so the Royal Australian College of Surgeons, as part of this BRIPS launch, is also training. So over the next 3 years, we're sending out, we're running 900 training programs to train the trainers, basically, to just train the supervisor on performance management and how to recognise these problems and how to report them.
That's one of the problems as well, is that if these things do come up, then often, we aren't trained very well how to be managers, how to be supervisors, how to be everything apart from a competent or an excellent physician or clinician. And so these are all accessory skills that perhaps are more natural to, say, a business or management or corporate context, but that haven't been adequately translated into health. That's why those fields are racing ahead of us in the way that they manage their employees, in the ways that they deliver feedback, in the way that they train to train. And so that's one of the main things that's come out of all of this in in terms of the why is this the way it is, and it's because the way that we teach our juniors goes back to it's very traditional, medieval times. You learn by humiliation, very Socratic. But what we need to do is move on and think about new methods and better ways to do that, so that it is a safe environment for us and for our patients. And I think that patient safety thing is so key, because if somebody is being bullied and somebody's being made to be uncomfortable and isn't able to focus on their work, doesn't feel safe to ask questions, to alert when they're not feeling that they're able to manage a patient situation, say you've got a deteriorating patient in front of you, they're not feeling safe to make that phone call because, he's going to scream at me when I make that call at 2 a.m., then that is to the detriment of patient safety.
A similar model, ask your question.
Just going on with that point about the people who may be perpetrating the bullying might not realise that that's what they're actually doing. I think certainly a trend I've noticed, and I think you guys would have too, is that when having these discussions, and I think partially the reason why there aren't that many men here is that often people seem to feel quite threatened by these discussions. And maybe there's that part of it that there might need to be a bit of recognition of, well, maybe I am bullying, maybe these things that I'm either doing or letting go aren't okay. But the fact is that this discussion is mostly the women, not the men. And how do we bring in the people who maybe need to hear what we're saying? Or how do you, aside from making the training compulsory, which is important, but how do we involve more people in the discussion without making them feel threatened?
Look, I think that's a really important point. One of the things, and I've had a very interesting career because I was in a different surgical specialty, and I had a very bad year, and I had a very traumatic incident, and I walked out of the hospital, I rang the training board, and I resigned, and I sent an email to the college, and I resigned from the college. I went to the hospital, I got put on stress leave to work out my notice, and I walked out, and I went, I never want to be a surgeon, I never wanted to, this is it, I'm so unhappy, I just don't want to do this. And I took 18 months off, and I was going to either become an emergency physician or a radiologist. And the reason why I'm a surgeon is because one of my old mentors found out that I'd left surgery, rang me and said, "You will come to my office immediately." And I went to see him, and he basically said, because I'd worked with him, he said, "You are going to come back next year. I need somebody who's senior to fill in for someone's maternity leave. Come and do a year. If you still hate it, I will write you a reference and you can leave, and at least you will know that you have chosen to leave for the right reasons, that, because you don't want to be a surgeon, not because you've had such a terrible year." And it was the best thing that happened to me. I loved the year. I went, oh God, I do love being a surgeon. And I came back and I'm now a surgeon. And what, for me, that aha moment was when we were actually, this is not this year, but last year when this all come out, there was a sort of closed room discussion within various surgeons about bullying and harassment, and they'd actually got these psychologists, and the psychologist got up and said, "This is going to sound a bit rude to all the surgeons in the room, but all of you, you're like pedophiles, because you've all been treated so badly when you were being trained, you think that this is the appropriate way to behave, and this is how you now train your trainees, because you were trained like this, and now you do the same thing." And it is so true. If you actually look at senior surgeons, most of them will actually tell you horrific stories of how they were trained. How they were thrown against walls, and how they were made to work long hours and told that they were ridiculous and rubbish and whatever. But that was that was accepted. And so that's how they think, well, that's how we should train. And I think this is your point about the fact that they don't realise that what they do is wrong. But it is changing, and I think that's the important thing. And you can't change them individually, and I think that is the whole culture about it. And that if you have to change the culture, people start talking about it, you have the discussion. So with College of Surgeons now, we actually all have to do an online module, which is about operate with respect. And it's part of our CPD points. So, you'll find this when you finish, you have to do continuing professional development. And so for the College of Surgeons, part of our continuing professional development is we all have to do this module on bullying and harassment. And it basically a 45-minute thing. It has a video, it shows bad behaviour, it shows good behaviour, and there's a whole lot of questions about it. And the really good thing about it is it has some very interesting things there, which are stuff that I think senior surgeons might go, oh, really? Is that really bullying? But, okay.
I do that every day.
I do that every day. And I think that is the way of gently doing it, because I think, we are going to see a change. And, gender is a really important thing. I was saying before, when the reason I became a surgeon is when I was an intern, I was at Liverpool Hospital, and I saw this woman walk across the corridor, and she was really well dressed, high heels. She looked like she would just basically walk over anybody that stood in her way. And I was like, who is she? And they said, oh, that's the ENT registrar. She was the only female surgical registrar in the whole hospital. And I remember at the time thinking, I want to be just like her. And fast forward to many years later, when I was finishing my last year of vascular training at Liverpool Hospital, and I was on call one weekend. And that weekend, every single registrar that was on call for surgery was a woman. Orthopedics, urology, ENT, vascular, general surgery, we were all women. The anaesthetic registrars were women. It was just, sorry to all the men, it was just a really lovely weekend on everyone chatted nicely about whose case was going to go first. And everyone took it in turns, none of this, well, I'm going to do my NOF now, and you can do your leg later, whatever. Everyone just had a chat. What do you want to do? Oh, okay, well, why don't you go first and I'll go second? It's really lovely, but it was seriously that change in that many years to go from having one female registrar in the entire hospital to having an entire on call, which was all women. And the fact that people weren't, standing around going, this female registrar, it's not like that anymore.
27% of the entire Royal Australian College of Surgeons fellowship is female now. It's about 28% in New South Wales. And I think that will increase, because I think 50% of the medical student intake is now female.
And I think it's much higher within training as well.
Just to further add something to your, I think you don't have to come to something like this to be taught about bullying. I think you just teach by example. And you teach by not allowing that behaviour. So one of the men that haven't turned up here tonight has badly behaved, then it's up to us to tell them that's not the right behaviour. And eventually it sinks them.
Can I just add as well that bullying and harassment is not a women's issue. This is something that affects male trainees as well. Very much so. We've heard a very strong example of that tonight. And this is.
But it happens with sexual orientation.
Yeah.
To name one.
Yeah, like I said, there's so many things that make people more likely to be bullied. And generally, it's anything that would essentially be non-straight white old man. No, seriously, when you look at the data, that's just how it is. That doesn't mean that those people aren't bullied as well, though. So, and it also means that the only perpetrators of bullying and harassment doesn't mean that they are all white men by any stretch of the imagination. In fact, if you look at the studies among nurses, which is by far a female-dominated profession, rates of bullying is just as bad, if not worse, in some parts compared to the medical profession. So this is not an issue of gender in and of itself. However, there are disproportionate groups that are disproportionately affected. And I do strongly believe that one of the great solutions is pushing for gender equity for various reasons.
Well, we're actually just about to, because on that idea that was brought up about creating a culture that's safer, I think you make a big step towards that when you have women in positions of power, because now it's it's women that are equally dictating what the atmosphere and working conditions should be like, and they can reflect their own experiences of that. So what do you think are some ways that we can increase female leadership?
So I guess when I went to, I heard Elizabeth Broderick speak a couple of times now, first at the AMA Roundtable last year and most recently in the New South Wales Health Forum on this issue a couple of weeks ago. And I love her. I just like kind of fangirl out about her because she's so amazing. For those who haven't come across her, she was the Sex Discrimination Commissioner. But anyway, she's very across this issue and has a few very key points and lessons that she likes to give in her talks, which really stuck with me. And I think that my aha moment, one of them was at the round table in Canberra, where she kind of just articulated exactly how culture can go wrong and can fail people. And what she really described is that this is not, people setting out to be jerks. This is culture failing all of us. This is, essentially medicine is a very hierarchical culture which arose within a very male structure of socialization, of interaction, of doing things. And because of the way that we need to, well, that we have sort of trained our training over the years, this has basically stayed around. And this tends to be the same in other hierarchical organisations or industries such as police, military, that kind of thing, where there's very strong hierarchy and power structures within them. And so it's very difficult for women to come into that model, and without that model, that structure, that culture changing, for women to succeed. And so to try and get women into medical leadership positions, the culture has to, and this is a quote, deliberately include them or the system will exclude them, okay? So you need to deliberately include women and try and shape a culture in which women can be included in it, or they will be left out if you just allow the status quo to continue. So that's one thing. The second thing is, well, no, not second thing, there's much things. So in order to get more women into positions of leadership, you really have to say this is something you can do. And so that involves, I think, mentoring from a very junior level. That means from when you're a student, when you're a trainee, having amazing female surgeons that you can look up to if you think that surgery is male dominant, and you go, well, hang on, there's a counter example. Okay? So that's great, having role models and people that can mentor you. And it doesn't have to be a female mentor. We've got a beautiful example about an amazing supportive male mentor who made the world of difference. And it's just about finding those people to believe in you, like anybody needs. The other thing that I'm really passionate about, so I'm going to have just a little 30-second kind of shake my fist on it, to do with gender equity in workforce policy. So I'm a paediatric trainee. I think I was probably diverted into paediatric training. I always wanted to do neonates, but I decided at the end of medical school I was going to be an adult trainee. And kind of went through and was like, oh, I don't really like any of these health specialties. I don't really like the whole pick an organ thing. Well, like enough to renege on the whole neonate thing. But I certainly remember just really insidious, repeated examples of being told that I wasn't welcome in a lot of other specialties. And many of them were during my surgical rotations. I remember a particularly unpleasant urology rotation. I was lucky enough never have anything really obvious and awful happen to me, but for me it was these real insidious, just little, you know what, you're just not welcome here. And I think that's why I in part ended up in a very female-dominated field. But where the workforce policies come in is that if you're a woman, so there are some biological imperatives that are a little bit tricky to plot. So pregnancy, childbirth are kind of the main two things to think about. And you can't really just tag that onto, I can't tag that onto my male partner. I have to do those things. And that requires a little bit of time off. Child rearing, however, I think is an optional. That can certainly go either way. And that to me is my big bugbear when people say, oh, well, you need to, when I was giving career advice, you need to pick a specialty that's flexible so that you can go and have children. I'm like, pretty sure my partner has the children too. Like, that's not just it could be if I want it, but I want them to be involved. So to me, when we say, oh, well, you need to do this because you need a flexible work life, but to ignore the fact that many men want a flexible work life is completely wrong. And you can't keep saying, well, we need to include women, we need to get women back into the workforce without saying, well, actually, this whole problem has arisen in a broader culture of our whole Australian society where there are greater expectations of women to perform domestic duty, 70% on average. And we're sort of loading more and more on women, I feel, without saying, hang on, how are the men feeling about this? And that's what I mean when I say this is not just a women's issue, this is not just a men's issue. This is a broader conversation we need to have about the expectations of both sexes and their roles, not just at work, but at home. And until we can say, get better parental leave for men, it's going to be really hard to get women back into that workforce.
Questions from the floor?
just had a question. So we've talked quite a lot about essentially the context that's been happening with RACs over the last 18 months or so. I wanted to know broadly within other medical colleges whether there have been similar kind of interesting conversations about bullying culture, and also I guess a question about allied health as well. Like I'm assuming that potentially medical professionals are bullying their trainees is potentially not the only example. There might be bullying with nurses, occupational therapists, physiotherapists, medical students. At what point are those things sort of being considered as well in this inquiry?
I know for a fact that the Royal Australian College of Surgeons is regarded by a lot of the other medical specialties as a leader in bullying, in these cultural changes which are now taking place. That's not to say that they haven't got their own programs in place or they haven't started, but just a couple of weeks ago there was a bullying forum where a lot of medical specialties were present, and including our Vice President, John Beasley, and he basically became clear that the other medical specialties were really looking to the College of Surgeons for inspiration. So I can't really say, I don't know.
Well, I can comment. I was just going to say, so on Facebook, for anyone who has kids, there is a Facebook page which is Medical Mothers and Mothers-to-Be, and there's about 4,000 members on that, all specialties. And one of the things when this whole thing came out was the fact that people were like, oh my goodness, we've seen what just come out in the newspaper. And people started giving examples of things that would happen to them in every specialty. And it was amazing. You know, even in GP practice, where you think, you know, everyone's GP land, it must be so nice. Everyone talks about it. You know, and people were giving examples of how they'd been bullied in their GP practice and how it was even worse for them because they were so isolated as a GP trainee, they had no one to talk to. And, you know, so bullying is not, it's not a surgical thing, and it's certainly not a hospital-based thing. It can happen anywhere. And I think it's certainly a lot of the colleges are looking into it. I think that, and I do think that becoming a parent is a really big thing that happens. And certainly I did not realise how tough being a mother was till I became a mother. I really thought, and you know, my obstetrician laughs because when I was pregnant, I went to my obstetrician and I said to him I was going to take time off. I finished my training and I was like, well, you know, I'm going to be on maternity leave, so I'm just going to do some research. I might finish a master's and, you know, I'm going to do a few things. And he just smiled and nodded at me. And I came back for my 6-week check and he was like, so how's the research going? And I remember looking at him going, I had a shower today. That's all I've managed. Shut up. I was so sleep deprived, and I was like, oh my god. I actually thought it was like the worst mistake I've ever made. So I was like looking for the refund. Surely I can return this child to somebody. And so it's a really interesting thing for me in that I have become a lot more passionate about women and children and things. And I think, first of all, to all of you that want to be surgeons, the very important thing is choose your partners well. That's really important because I think that's a general thing. Not just for surgeons. But it is true, and I think the other thing, and I think you know, there's a couple of really great books that I like. You know, Annabelle Crabb's The Wife Drought is a really great book to read. Lean In by Sheryl Sandberg. One of the things that I really liked from that book was when she said how people make decisions on their life based on what they think their future life is going to be. So there's a lot of girls, and I see a lot of medical students that say, I'm not going to be a surgeon because I want to have children and that's not going to work. So I can't be a surgeon and be a mother. And for those of you who think that I'm a surgeon, I'm a mother, I work part-time. I earn more money than most women would ever earn working 3 days a week. You know, I earn more money than most men earn working 5 days a week. And I have a great lifestyle and I get to operate and I get to work, I get to choose my hours. And I couldn't imagine doing anything different. And so what I say to you is don't make decisions now based on where you think you're going to be. You're going to think, well, you know, I'm going to be a mum, I'm going to have 3 kids, I better not do surgery. And do what you're passionate about, because that's really important. Because at the end of the day, one of the reasons I left the surgical specialty that I was in was I actually quite hated it. And then I had these bosses that I did not like, and they didn't like me. And as I said to somebody, when you're doing something you hate with people that you don't like, it's very easy to just walk away. But if you're doing something that you love, even if these people are horrible to you, you will stick it out because you're thinking, I love what I do, I'm going to get through this. And that makes a big difference. So don't settle for doing something for the wrong reason, And you can do anything in medicine as a parent, and that goes for men as well, because I think a lot of guys want to be home with kids as well, just as much as their women do. Having children are fantastic. They're also really great to leave with carers and go to work as well. So don't think it's either or. So, and certainly that I think is the next frontier for medicine. I think that's the next big culture change. I think gender issues are changing, and we know we've got more female registrars in every specialty. We've got definitely more women coming through, but I think the real change, and I think this is the whole thing about leadership. I know for me, with the college, I'm on the board of the regional committee, and I can't imagine doing any more than I'm doing now, just because I can't afford the time away from my family. Because it's weekends, and if I want to do extra teaching and stuff, it is time away from the family. However, in 10, 15 years time, when my daughter's grown up, then that's going to be a different time as well for me, when I'll be more, more involved. And I think that's one of the things, is that we are going to probably see more women in medical leadership, but we are behind. And I think it will be sort of in 20 years time when all of a sudden there will be a big surge in female leadership. So I think at this point in time, a lot of us are just too busy.
Well, the chairman of the last chairman of the New South Wales State Committee was Mary Lancake, who is obviously a woman, and and a leader. And so I think it's happening slowly.
They're definitely there. What it is about is when you look at the fractions, and for some time now we've had at least parity of female compared to male graduates from medical school, and now we're actually a little bit greater than that, so this is actually 2% of female medical students. Yeah. So the problem is that it doesn't seem to kind of keep ratcheting up there, and even for that time, so say 20 years ago, I think roughly we achieved parity. And so you'd expect by now we would have rough parity even in leadership positions. That's not the case. I think there's lots of reasons for that. To do with women not being encouraged as much into leadership positions, less expectation being had that they will want to achieve them. People going, oh, but she wants to go have babies, and that's what she'll do. And that not in a disparaging way, but just thinking like that's just how it is. And so I think if we can keep challenging that and going, you know what, actually my partner really, and he really wants to have time at home with his kids, and be involved in that, to allow me to go back to work. And hell, I'm a big fan of the childcare situation. So I think if we keep going, you know what, don't be boxed in by perhaps what you just see around you or what you feel like society is telling you to do, but actually go, you know what, I think it was really wise advice from me to do what you love and believe in yourself, because as Chloe mentioned, there is in a lot of research evidence to show that women are more likely to hold themselves back. So if you can push yourself and have that support network around you that allow you to do so, do it, shoot the stars.
I'm going to tell you a little anecdote. So my last year of training, I went back to the Port Hospital, the vascular team there, and there were 2 female trainees. So the 2 trainees that year, both senior ones were female, and a couple of weeks in, one of the senior nurses was laughing at one of the consultants. And I said, what's funny? And she said, oh, my goodness, before the 2 of you came, he was moping up and down the corridor saying, woe is me, I've got 2 female trainees coming. This is the end of my life as I know it. This is going to be terrible. And, and she said, and now 2 weeks later, he's walking around saying, best thing ever, love my girls.
Charlie's age.
And, he's actually one of my mentors, and I privately assist him once a month because, he's good fun and I enjoy going and spending a day with him. And last year he was really mopey, and I was like, is everything okay? He goes, oh, you wouldn't believe what the board has done. They're sending us 2 male trainees. And I I just started laughing, and he goes, "You don't understand, because women are so much better." I love them. I love having them, and and it just made me laugh because he's a man who is in his 60s and has suddenly gone, I love my female surgical trainees, and I think, and this is the thing, things are changing. And so this is why I think that, for medical students, that you are going to be coming into a different world. And hopefully by the time you all get through, we will have part-time training in surgery, which again is the next big thing that the college is working on.
It's
flexible training, we're definitely trying to get that to happen, which is the big thing.
I certainly personally know some female surgical registrars that have been involved with that.
And things are, it is slow. You can't expect things to happen straight away, but it is in the works, and people want to see change. And certainly, and I think that's one of the things that's positive. And it's great to have people here who are interested. And I guess the thing I do want to say is to any of you, whoever do feel when you're in training as residents or registrars, and if you feel that you're being bullied, don't just take it. Go and talk to somebody, go and seek help. If you feel that you can't, and it still is, even with this broad report, everything, people still feel scared. You still feel as though this is going to make an impact on your career. Make sure you go and talk to somebody. There will always be someone senior that you can talk to. And don't just internalize it. Don't keep it to yourself. Seek help, talk to people, talk to your senior people, talk to your AMA reps, talk to your medical defence union. Because it's amazing how when you talk to somebody who's out of medicine, when I was a registrar, my sister who's in banking, and I used to say things that people had said to me, and she would just be like, "Oh my goodness, if someone said that to me in the banking industry, they would be fired and out the door so fast, their head would spin." She'd go, "That is just absolutely, I can't believe people say that to you, to your face, in front of other people, with witnesses around, and they get away with it." And that time, I think, is definitely changing. That is not going to be happening anymore. But even so, when you're going through, if there are things that are happening, feel free to talk out about it, and don't just keep it inside. And I think that's the important thing, is you have to report it. You've got to make it known.
Some of the things which came out 18 months ago when it's all hit the news was that those, I guess, avenues of reporting, people didn't feel like they could go approach them without massive impact, as you just referred to. How's that changed over the last 18 months, so that people can now report instances of harassment and whatever else, so that without fear for their career?
The Royal Australian College of Surgeons has set up a hotline, actually, where you can call and get advice as to what to do. That's one concrete thing. I think cultural change will also make it much easier to be less afraid.
I think there's a transparency. So I think in the old-fashioned way, I mean, I know when I had trouble in my old surgical specialty, that I had to go and face the board, and it was the board of that specialty, and basically them saying, "Yeah, whatever, we know this is a problem unit, but so what? They're a big unit, we can't afford to lose them, we need their training spot, toughen up." So whereas now I think if something happens, it's going to go towards a broader RACS committee. It won't just be within that subspecialty, so that you won't be, you won't feel as though that's
closed shop.
Yeah. So these are the people that are going to make that decision for me. And I think it's really, and I think it's surprising, because you do feel when you want to make a report that you think, I'm the only person. When I resigned and left the College of Surgeons, the number of people that rang me from that specialty, the number of girls that rang me and said, "Oh my goodness, the same thing happened to me, and I took a lawyer with me to the board," and it was amazing. These were all people who were senior to me, and I had no idea they'd all gone through these problems. It was so eye-opening to me that at least 10 people rang me and told me how they'd been bullied, male, female, and I didn't know about it, and I was in that specialty because people just didn't talk about it. And I think this is what's been important, is that we are talking about it.
And I guess from a New South Wales Health point of view, I know that they are nearly done. They're developing a new module. I don't think policy is a solution they're developing a new JMO-specific module for bullying and harassment in hospitals, because it is identified that junior doctors are a different group compared to like senior clinicians and other health staff, because of the reasons we've discussed. And so that is one thing we're doing. Part of that model is going to be to have support people who are essentially suggested either by TITS or by AMA reps or whoever, medical students to be essentially a champion of the junior doctors or medical students who are being put at risk by that unsafe workplace behaviour, and people that are removed from that specialty. So it's not your supervisor or your head of department who's the supervisor's golf mate that you're trying to complain to about his buddy, or it's not, you know, the person in the hospital that also is responsible for interviewing you in 2 weeks' time for the next year's job. So it's trying to separate what is a very interwoven and very complicated, kind of small closed shop in a lot of ways, trying to bring independent people in that can consider the complaint, figure out whether it is a true incidence of bullying and harassment, or whether maybe it's performance management gone wrong, and then figure out what is the appropriate way to handle that. Is it a corridor conversation to be like, oh, look, mate, that wasn't the best way to go, knock off on the not so tasteful jokes, or is it a, no, this is serious, we need to work through a complaints process with you. So having those people there to support you, both colleagues and mentors, and also like HR stuff.
HR, speaking of HR, I've met with Gillian Skinner and Prue. Gillian Skinner is the Health Minister in New South Wales, and Prue Goward's the Mental Health Minister over the last month. And it is, they certainly have these changes on their agendas. And it's filtering through into the workforce, into the health workforce. So there are avenues now through the health workforce that you can make these complaints.
But ultimately, it has to be culture change that makes people feel safe. Just a question.
Sorry, touching back on the very controversial, I guess, statement that started this whole national conversation, how Gabrielle McMahon was saying, you know, what I tell my female junior doctors, because you are approached for, like, stuff like work, but sexual pain, it's easier to go down the route of just performing it than reporting it. What are your personal opinions on it now? Like, after having that national conversation, after you've all said that, you know, there has been improvement and there is now this conversation amongst doctors and amongst RAPs especially. Do you still agree with that statement from what you see now in the work?
Absolutely not. I say this to all my trainees, and I will say this to all my medical students. When you grow up and you become grown-ups very soon, still university students, and you go to start working in hospitals, the things that will happen is that all of a sudden you'll be let loose, you'll be hormonal, and you'll be single, perhaps some of you. So my words is, do not have sex with anyone that you work with. Do not have sex with your consultants. Do not have sex with your registrars. And I know this sounds really silly because this is where you meet people, and people, lots of people meet their registrars and things, but on a sensible issue, when you're at work, it's work. Be professional. And I think this is one of the things in medicine in the past that people have, some of the old surgeons still say jokes about the nurses' home and how, it was given because you work such long hours that you'll be going out with the nurses and whatever. And I think there is a lot of that, that happens, and there's a lot of banter that happens, which I would suggest to you, it's a professional workplace. Don't do it. I think that if someone is sexually harassing you and asking you for something, that is wrong and that is illegal, and don't do it and report it. That is.
I think it's all about whether it's welcome or not, because I was just going to counterpoint multiple wedding friends who are like, registrars together or whatever. I agree entirely with the principle. But it's right, it's right.
Yeah. Look, it's different if you're sort of peers and stuff, but from a seniority point of view, you just got to be really careful. I know lots of people that have gone down that road and lived to regret it. And don't forget, these are people that you're going to be, especially in your small field, you end up working with these people. And someone may never tell you this. People may never ever say this to you, but you are going to be professionals, and you need to think about the fact that some of these can impact on your professional life in the future. I know somebody that went for a job that was never going to get that job because she slept with 2 of the people on the panel, and there was no way that she was ever going to get that job. And so you just have to actually think about the fact that some of the things that you do, that you may be having fun and thinking this is all great, but they can have impact on your future.
I will just interject quickly because I feel like Dr. McFarlane is not here to necessarily defend herself, but having heard her speak multiple times, I don't think at any point what she meant to say, though perhaps what the media picked up was different. She was never saying, I tell my trainees to do it.
It was never a you should.
It was very much the sad fact of our reality is that it is easier to comply than it is to kick up a fuss. And in many ways, I think it's worth considering, is it, it might be a bit safer now to complain than it was before, but is it truly a completely safe process?
So look, I think as other panel members,
I do agree, it isn't a completely safe process, but I do think we've spoken through the ways that it has come leaps and bounds, particularly the past 18 months. And I would say that I agree with Peggy in that front. And also I'd just like to quickly comment on mentorship. I think that, we've all heard about the value of mentorship. It is so much easier said than done. And I know that all of my friends who have mentors were lucky enough to find themselves in that scenario. And that when you see someone in a hospital scenario, outside, male or female, and they inspire you, don't be afraid to say, hey, can we have a relationship? Can you mentor me?
In a mentor.
Yeah. And seeing those relationships, and I think that you'll find them really helpful. I'm not asking you to take
Slightly sort of pragmatic and it seems like it's potentially inevitable because change is coming, but it's not quite there yet. That all of us in this room will at some point experience bullying, harassment, or sexual harassment. What are things I've heard from people? I've heard them say, keep a notebook where if an incident happens, you record it immediately so that you can always pull back. If someone's like, how do you know it's bullying? You're like, well, let me refer you to page 2, 3, and 4 where this happened. Or have some sort of recording device, one of those little pens that records things, so you can record something if it's happening. Are there any sort of pragmatic pieces of advice that you think we should take into account? It's sad that we do. That means that if we're in that situation, we're more likely to be believed, we're more likely to find that it's a good process.
I think something we've spoken about is reporting structures and how they need to be improved. But also the fact is there needs to be more clarity regarding reporting structures. As medical students, you lie in this weird grey area between universities and hospitals. And universities are usually very clear in their policies regarding bullying and harassment. But something we found as answer last year, when we did a call out for both hospital and university policies, is that hospital policies are usually quite internal and they're hard to get a hold of. And I think that you can put pressure on your faculties to make university and hospital policies regarding these issues available to you. And you can educate yourselves and your kids about them so that when these things do inevitably happen, you know how to escalate.
And on the basis of that education, to me, the main thing is keep the talk up. This issue is a hot issue at the moment. I've been to a bunch of sessions on this issue this year alone, and this is a year down the track. So that's not just a quick turnover of a media cycle. This is really gained traction. We really need to keep pushing. Unless we keep the pressure on, that's when it falls into the distance. That's when people stop thinking about it and go, oh, maybe we've changed enough. So keep the pressure on. But the real practical thing that I would suggest is, number one, if it's happening to you and it's that insidious little thing, which is the bulk of what I think I have experienced in my career, it's just that little niggling comment that maybe that day doesn't matter, maybe the one the next day doesn't either. But after a week, I'm like, you know what? I just have a bad taste in my mouth about this. Call it out. Doesn't matter if it's just all that little stuff that in and of itself, you kind of take it on board and you tend to go, oh, but I can't deal with that, it's okay, whatever, brush it off, next rotation, just keep going. But call it out because there's somebody behind you coming after you who's going to get the same crap.
Just on that very note, I know you were asked, I'm just wondering, that terrible experience that I had during my training, one of the regrets that I had, one of the few regrets that I have in my life, is that I didn't complain about it then. So if I had, then the woman trainee that followed me, wouldn't have been strangled by that surgeon in the operating theatre in front of everyone. Not killed, but that's the sort of thing that I think we can sort of prevent. And it wasn't until that incident that huge changes were made in that department. And I wrote a letter 9 months down the track because I kept showing the letter to my new mentors, and they kept saying, no, it's still too angry, it's still too angry. So it took 9 months for me to cool down enough to write a coherent letter to make a complaint. So my advice to you is to not shut up about it. Because one, it can cause a lot of damage to yourself, but it can also cause detriment to other people. It just makes me think of the airline industry, where a lot of this has been, they've already passed through these processes. In the airline industry, bullying can crash planes. So it's just sort of thing for you to think about.
And I think also if you see it, the bystander principle is really important. We've talked about General David Morrison. His famous quote is that the standard you walk past is the standard you accept. I think that's incredibly important for us because we all know that this happens. We've all seen this happen. How many times have we seen it happen to someone else and gone, glad that's not me? And that's kind of been the extent of our reaction. Having bystanders who might not be, we already know that if you are in that position, you are already disempowered. You're probably going down that spiral at some point, and you're getting less and less able to be able to call that out. Like we've said, it's ideal to be able to. So if you can be the person who sees that happen and either goes, you know what, that's probably not okay, and calls it out there, checks with that person to see how they're going, whether they're okay, or reports it. If you can be that bystander and stand up for that situation, because if you don't, then you are implicitly accepting that, and you are perpetuating that culture that is an okay thing to happen.
Yeah.
So we've been talking a lot about like processing complaints, education, culture, but what steps have been taken to sort of set up support programs around these people? Because if they've been bullied for a long term, there's obviously going to have some mental health effects on that person. And I was wondering what steps have been made to sort of make these services available to sort of help them empower these people.
Within the College of Surgeons, we have a special service with Converge, which is a psychological company. And so if anyone feels they can bring up, and they'll get a certain number of free counselling sessions. And then after that, you obviously have to pay for them, but you have those sort of initial few things.
Same with RACP, they've just signed up to this.
One of the things that happens though is that it is available to people who are members of the college. And one of the areas that we know is that, you know, people, medical students, junior doctors, unaccredited surgical registrars, they kind of miss out because they're not fee-paying members of the College of Surgeons. For those of you, the hospital does have staff counsellors. So there are actually within hospitals, all hospitals have got human resources, they've got social work.
JDocs? Do you know if JDocs have access to that?
So within the hospital, there are people that you can talk to. I just want to say, I know this sounds all very doom and gloom and stuff. Look, my junior doctor days were some of the best days. I was in a hospital, made great friends. We were a really great bunch of interns. We all supported each other. And I think that's really important, is to support your colleagues. And sometimes, you know, you will have people bully at you, and it won't always be bullying. You know, I have been known occasionally, very occasionally, to yell when something goes really badly wrong. I will usually pull myself back in and apologise and say, I'm really sorry, because sometimes, you know, when you're in the middle of an operation, something's happening, it can be quite stressful. And occasionally, you know, I might sort of say, will you please stop talking and just hand me that damn thing when the nurse is not paying attention? And, you know, and afterwards, I will always say, I'm really sorry. I shouldn't have spoken to you like that. That was really inappropriate. Okay. And that will happen to you when you're an intern or resident. Someone will at some stage yell at you or say something to you. The important thing is if they recognise it and they say that's inappropriate, then I think that's something that you can either say to them, look, you do it all the time, so I think you need to stop how you're behaving. Or if it happens once, you just go, cool, that's fine. So my mentor that brought me back to surgery, one day I'd rung him and he yelled at me because there was about a patient who was bleeding in intensive care. He'd been in the hospital operating all day. I picked up the pager at like 6 o'clock in the evening, and the first thing that ICU did was ring me about this patient is bleeding. And so I rang him, and he just left like half an hour ago after being in the hospital since 7 o'clock that morning. And this patient's been bleeding sort of for 6 hours. So he was understandably really cross because he just got home. And he let me have it because he was cross. And I cried, which I didn't normally cry enough as a registrar. And, you know, I tried to sort it out. I was very junior at the time, and the senior registrar that came in that night. And I said, oh, you know, so-and-so rang at me and yelled at me, and, you know, can you do this, and can you ring him, and stuff. And he was like, don't be ridiculous. I've never heard him yell at anybody in his entire life. And I said, no, he did. Anyway, the next morning, this registrar came to me and said, wow, he really must have yelled at you, because when I rang him, he was really, really apologetic. He asked me how you were, and he said how bad he felt. And, you know, and he actually, and this surgeon actually, and this is one of the reasons why I really admire him and respect him, is that as a junior registrar, he was the only surgeon that has ever apologized to me for yelling at me. And he actually came, found me the next day and said, I just want to say how sorry I am for the way I spoke to you. So, you know, things will happen. You know, medicine can be a really stressful place. But, you know, I don't want you to all sit here and think bullying, sexual harassment is inevitable, because I don't think that's the message we want to be giving you. I think the message we want to be giving you is that things are changing, and yes, there may be occasions when something hasn't changed far enough, and if that happens, then, you know, these are the things you should do. But on the whole, please don't be walking out of here feeling depressed and feeling as though maybe it's time to choose another career, because I still think that being a doctor is the best thing ever.
I think on the point of like self-care in general, having your own GP is a really important thing. I think that's something that AMA certainly does as well, for a range of reasons.
Doctors are notorious for not having their own GP.
Yeah, and a lot of the medical societies will have lists of GPs that will see you and monitor you as well. So
just on one of the other topics that we're talking on about here, which is the gender equity, and we've talked a fair bit about the barriers to women in medicine and barriers to women in surgery. But what are we understanding is the barriers to other diverse groups? So different sexual orientations, gender orientations, and cultural groups.
Well, I think it's very similar to the barriers affecting women in the sense that if this is not your house, like this is not medicine. I spoke before about the sort of the system and the structures of medicine and medical culture that was grown up in white Anglo-Man land. And if you are not white Anglo-Man, that it just literally is a different way of being and of doing things. So I think that kind of there are any number of characteristics that can make people feel not welcome. Being a minority certainly just puts you at a disadvantage of the way that people are operating in, not in the surgical sense, it's in behaving. It's not terribly inclusive, that kind of thing. Certainly for IMGs, there are unique sets of stressors, being on different sort of training pathways to other people having to go through AMC routes rather than conventional training programs. You know, not having family supports around, not being able to identify for fear of discrimination, particularly with like LGBTIQ identifying peers. And so I think that those are all difficulties that can strike different groups. But that's not to say that they're insurmountable. What it is to say is that we have to have a better recognition that a medical workforce that better reflects, and so certainly medical leadership that better reflects not only its workforce but its community, is going to be a more effective one, a safer one, and a happier one.
Right. And I think in Australia, especially, you know, in terms of diversity, you know, I was born in Sri Lanka, so, you know, I'm not white by any means. I occasionally forget when I talk to my North Shore patients. And, you know, certainly on council at the moment, we've got Kyle, who's Indian origin. We've got lots of, you know, within, you know, RACs as well, it's incredibly diverse. Last year at the Young Fellows Forum, we had so many different backgrounds and cultures and things. And I think, you know, that's society in Australia, and I think that's reflected within that. And I don't think, I mean, I think if I had to pick any group that I think would have a bit more trouble, I think it's anyone that, you know, and I think this is my personal viewpoint, I think anyone that speaks English with an accent, I think they will always, even now, they still have a little bit of issues, and I think that's probably the next thing as well, that people, because I think after a while you start telling people, and people kind of forget. You know, I had a patient the other day who said to me something along the lines of, I don't really want to go and see that doctor because they're not white. And I just remember looking at him thinking, sweetie, you've seen me, and he just went, oh, but you're one of us, and it was, and I understood what he meant was he didn't want to see that person because they spoke English with an accent, and that's what they meant. It wasn't so much what their colour was. They'd be quite happy, I'm sure, to see anybody as long as they kind of spoke. And I think that's the next thing, is that is that.
Well, I'm the chairman of the board, and I'm gay, and I always have been. And I've never felt discriminated against because of that. And as far as I can tell, my colleagues have known about it, and they gave me jobs, and I became a surgeon. So I think that in Australia, I think we're very lucky that despite the misrepresentation in government at the moment, there is certainly a culture of acceptance. And I don't think, now having said that, there are members of the gay and lesbian groups that are discriminated against, and I don't think the medical profession knows how to deal with transgender people, and certainly there are a couple of transgender residents that have occurred, and I think it's been a very traumatic experience. But at the end of the day, I think if you do your work well and you earn respect for your work, then I don't think it really matters.
I think there's a lot of unconscious bias that we all have. And one of the things that we were actually talking about at our CDT meeting over the weekend was unconscious bias training, which is one of the things that Ruth, who's the Raxter chair, is kind of talking. I think there's discussions about bringing that in as the kind of the next step in training, and making people realise what their unconscious biases are. Certainly, things like interview processes are more prone to be biased when you've got a person in front of you about whom you perhaps make subconscious judgments compared to other more objective selection processes. And so ways of trying to make our selection processes, particularly into training, but for all jobs at all levels, really more objective and transparent, I guess, is a way of trying to overcome that, but also being aware of your own judgments and your own biases.
I think, one of the important things is, like within surgery training, a female trainee, if you ask them if they can do an operation, will not tell you that they're competent until they've done at least 10 of them and they feel that they're competent. Whereas male trainees will, on the whole, if they've seen one done, say, yep, I can do that. And it is very apparent. One of my registrars rang me and said, oh, I can do this operation for you. And I said, oh, can you describe it to me? And he kind of described it very haphazardly. And I was like, yeah, no, you're not doing the operation. But it is definitely something that I think we all do. Women and men talk differently. Women say a lot of things sometimes. We use a lot of words to say the same thing, whereas men might say a few words. And I know during my training, that was one of the criticisms. I do talk a lot. But one of the criticisms that I got given was, you talk way too much. And it was that department which I didn't like. And it made me laugh because I talked to them the least. Like, I didn't want to talk to them. So I was trying to talk to them as briefly as possible. So it always made me laugh to think that they thought I still talked too much when I was trying to get off that phone as quickly as I could. So, but I do think that there are differences in how we train as well and in how we go ahead.
I also think that over the past few years, there's been an evolving understanding of the fact that the more closely the medical profession represents the community it serves, the better that it serves. And we've seen that in regards to affirmative action, in regards to Indigenous pathways, and in regards to students from rural background, and that perhaps those programs should continue, and we should acknowledge we have room to move there in regards to diversity.
And what business literature tells us is that as you get a more diverse team, the results are much better for that team compared to one which is made up of men or women or one cultural group, whatever. They've done a lot of experiments to kind of figure out what is the optimal mix, and actually it's as different as you can make it, which is one of the things that very forward-thinking companies like Google are pushing for, is essentially the most diverse, crazy background you can have. And I think that's, we could learn a lot from that approach to the way that we select med school into training.
Rather than all from one.
Yeah, rather than trying to pick who looks like the people sitting above them.
Yeah, I think that is a really important point to brought up, that when we're talking about groups that are more marginalised and more disadvantaged, we're talking about gender equity, and that is all genders. There are plenty of people within that spectrum, but also Indigenous people who face huge disadvantage. It also reminds me that I'd be really bad, but I forgot to do an acknowledgement in this country. So I think that is really important. It's something we should do all of our events. I'd like to pay my respects to the traditional owners of the land and to acknowledge the elders past and present. I'm sorry for that. But thank you so much for speaking. I'm sure I speak on behalf of all of us. I thought that was really insightful. It was really interesting. There were lots of different perspectives, ranging all the way from medical student pediatrician to vascular surgeon. Yeah, it was really phenomenal. Thank you so much. And I know there are people that are watching the video that are going to be messaging and saying that they enjoyed it. So I'd like to say thank you. And we have some gifts for them.
It's really nice to see people who are interested.
Do you want a candle?
I'll make one. So you can start with your hand. And maybe a little bit of discussion. Yeah.